Okay, welcome to my third episode of Coffee with Robbie. Today we're going to be talking about Negotiation Genius by Harvard professors Deepak Malhotra and Max Bazerman. This book has actually changed my behavior quite a bit and has changed how I do any negotiations for anything, whether it's fruit or compensation or whatever it is. It's changed how I do my negotiation. And what I want to do is share a few tactics from the book. Again, there's hundreds of tactics in the book, but I want to talk about a few of them that have really changed how I think. And so, rule number one when negotiating is to understand your ZOPA. ZOPA. And what ZOPA means is zone of possible agreement. Again, that's zone of possible agreement. So what that means is anytime you're going into a negotiation for anything, whether you're buying property or salary, whatever there is, you need to create your own ZOPA. You need to create your own zone of possible agreement. And so, when the examples in the book, they use a real estate property that's going up for sale. And so, for this example, let's pretend that I'm the buyer and I want to buy this property. And so, there's the buyer. This is all backwards. There's the buyer reservation value, and then there's the seller reservation value. And so, the buyer reservation value, that's how much. That is the maximum amount of money that I'm going to pay for this property. Again, I know that internally I'm not sharing that with anyone, but I know in this example that I'm not going to spend more than $48 million for this property because why not? I'm wealthy, right? If you don't have that much money, move a couple zeros and pretend we're talking about like Xbox games. So that's $48. Okay. Even though you probably lose on that one. So in this example, my reservation value is $48 million. I'm not going to spend more than $48 million on this property. Again, I'm not telling the seller that, but I know this is the maximum I want to pay. Now, would I want to pay less than $48 million? Of course. But I know that's my maximum limit. And my goal with this negotiation is how do I essentially get the best amount for this. So if I can pay $45 million, I'll pay $45 million. That's great, but I just don't want to pay more than $48 million. And so now the other one is the seller reservation value, which is this example, $42.65 million. Now that's the number that I think as the buyer is the minimum amount that the seller will sell this property for. So I think based on the research that I've done that the lowest they'll sell it for is $42.65 million. Okay, again, that's stuff that information that I think. Okay, now again, so I think the maximum I'm going to pay is $48 million, and the lowest I think they'll sell it for is 42. In between this area here, let me circle it in here. Right there, in between this amount is the ZOPA. That is the zone of possible agreement. So I think if I can negotiate that person to $43 million, then that's a deal for me. Okay, and that's really what you want to do in negotiation. So how do I get the best, essentially the deal when I'm doing this? So step number one is to get as much information as possible. And so that's how you come up with your seller reservation value. Again, that's how much I think their minimum is. And that's just due diligence, obviously researching what is their lowest amount that they'll sell it for. But other things you can do during negotiation is to ask questions. Be very diligent in the questions that you ask them to understand what their lowest amount is. And they'll never tell you straight out, but you have to take a sort of a guess of what that is. And two is to understand from the seller's perspective, especially when they create their ZOPA, is to understand the value of what you're selling. Okay, so a lot of people make these mistakes, especially during like salary negotiation. Is they'll see something says, okay, business analyst, that's $50,000 a year. Okay, so that means that I'm going to be paid $50,000 or $51,000 a year, and that's where many people go wrong. It's about the value of what you're selling. It's the value of your services, and not just that anchor amount. So in this case, for the seller, let's just assume they had the same ZOPA. They came up with the same information before they entered negotiation. Let's just say that the agreement was that they were going to use this for residential purposes, and so the seller used that information to say, okay, if it's going to be used for residential, then the maximum that person will pay for is $48 million. Okay, because I know based on residential area, this is how much money they'll profit, etc. I think that's the amount of money that they're willing to pay. And so the key, the tactic there is get information, but also understand the value of what they're selling it for, and the value of why they want to buy it. And so, but if it was used for commercial purposes, okay, then that number of $48 million is actually really low, because if it's used for commercial, they'll make a lot more money using that real estate land. And so that can change everything. So it's very key to ask, what are you using this land for? If it's for residential, then you know that the amount's going to be lower. But if it's commercial, then you have much bigger room to go higher. So whenever you're asking somebody, ask them why. Why do you want to buy this? And it's about the value of the services you provide, the value of the land, and not just the cost. Many people look at this as very one-dimensional, especially during like salary negotiations and anything like that. It's about the value of what you're providing, and you need to understand what the value is. 2. Now let's just say that as a buyer, I'm going to make my first offer. Again, I know that their reservation value is $43 million. I know that's the zone where I can make a deal. So now I have an option of what should be my first offer if I have to make a first offer. So do I do it here? Do I say $45 million? Or do I go much lower at $32 million? Here's something unbelievable that I learned in this book. Always anchor low or high. Always anchor low or high. And so in this example, if I did $32 million, then the seller is going to be like, wow, this is, I thought they're going to buy for $48 million, but it must be much, it must not be, my information must be wrong. And so the counter offer is going to be something, hopefully in the ZOPA area around here. But if I did it at 45, okay, then they're going to counter offer at something higher, at 50. And I've already lost value just based off my first offer. So the key here to learn is when anchoring, always anchor low or high. And that has been proven by a lot of research to affect the counteroffer significantly. And so, because if you anchor a lot lower here at 32 million, then the seller is going to come back with something like maybe like 45. But if you start at 45, then they're going to anchor somewhere at like 50. And that can have a big impact. So lesson number 2 that I learned from this book is anchor low or anchor high. That has a big impact on what the counteroffer is going to be. And last but not least, let's just say you made a deal. And again, in the book, they made a deal of $46 million. Okay. So you bought it, for $46 million. That's within your ZOPA. Okay. Well, let's just say that, for the seller thinking, wow, I got a great deal. My ZOPA was 42 and 48. I got really close. This backwards thing is really messing me up. I got really, really close to the top amount of $48 million. So they're thinking, I got a great deal. The problem is, I'm a big fat liar. And I told them it was going to be used for residential, but in reality, it was going to be used for commercial. And that value for me is much higher. at $60 million. So the question is, what can you do to protect yourself in a negotiation like that? And because you asked them, they said residential, but then they lied to you, and actually, so for that, and that means that you actually didn't get a good deal, and you could have sold it for a lot more. So what do? They talk about contingency contracts. So what you can do is say something like, okay, great, I'll sell it to you $46 million. Oh, by the way, there's a clause. If you use it for commercial property in the next 7 years, then you owe me another $10 million. And that's in the contract. Now that can change everything, because now that person, say if I was a big fat liar, now it changes my my negotiation, because I know that eventually I'm going to use it for commercial. So the easiest way to do that is to implement a contingency contract. And so this is one or two tactics of literally about 100 different tactics they've used in this book. A lot of great advice, tactical advice that you can use to maximize that. That's just a small subset, and they go into much bigger detail. I think there's a lot to learn from this book, Negotiation Genius by Max Bazerman and Deepak Malhotra. I hope you learned a few things, and shit, buy this book. I'm not getting anything from this. I get no commission. It's just a book that I recommend to everyone. Thank you.